Sometimes, when life feels like a storm with no end in sight, hope arrives quietly, like a stray cat on a rainy night. For the Bennetts, a family fractured by loss, this unexpected visitor became more than a guest. He became a bridge back to love, laughter, and the family they thought they'd lost forever. The Bennetts were once the kind of family you'd stop and admire from afar. Their home wasn't perfect, but it was filled with a warmth that seemed to spill out through every window. Dinner was often a chaotic mix of jokes, stories, and plans for the weekend. At the heart of it all was Ethan, their 17-year-old son, whose infectious energy lit up every corner of their lives. Ethan wasn't just a teenager with big dreams. He was a force of nature. He had a magnetic charm that made people want to be around him. He loved animals fiercely, often bringing home injured birds or stray dogs to nurse back to health. "One day, I'll be a vet," he'd tell his family, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "But for now, I'm just the neighborhood animal whisperer." His little sister Lily idolized him. She followed him everywhere, her sketchbook clutched in her hands as she documented their adventures. To her, Ethan wasn't just her brother. He was her hero, the person who taught her how to see magic in the mundane. But one fateful October night changed everything. It had rained heavily that evening, the kind of rain that made roads slick and visibility poor. Ethan was on his way home from a soccer game, his car navigating the winding country roads he knew so well. When the knock on their door came, Laura, his mom, was stirring a pot of soup. Mark, his dad, was upstairs working on a broken drawer. And Lily was in her room, doodling yet another story, inspired by Ethan's latest escapades. The police officer's words were kind, but devastating. "There was an accident," he said, his voice heavy with practiced compassion. The rain, the car skidded off the road. Ethan was gone. The news shattered their world. The Bennetts weren't just mourning the loss of a son, a brother. They were mourning the glue that held them together. Grief doesn't knock. It barges in uninvited and sets up camp in every corner of your life. The Bennetts' home, once filled with laughter, became eerily quiet. Laura coped the only way she knew how, by throwing herself into work. She stayed late at the office, burying herself in deadlines and spreadsheets to avoid the emptiness waiting at home. Mark retreated to the garage, spending hours tinkering with tools, as if the act of fixing something tangible could mend his shattered heart. Laura appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and wariness. The sight of the drenched cat made her pause, her instincts as a mother warring with her practical side. "Lily," she began cautiously, "we can't just take in stray animals." Her voice was firm but gentle, the tone of someone trying to avoid more chaos in a life already unbalanced. "He's cold, Mom. He needs us," Lily pleaded, her voice cracking with an emotion Laura hadn't heard in weeks. There was something in her daughter's eyes, a spark that had been absent since Ethan's accident. Mark emerged from the garage, wiping grease-stained hands on an old rag. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone neutral, though his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. "There's a cat," Lily explained, holding the shivering animal closer. "Can we at least bring him inside? Just for tonight?" Mark sighed, glancing between his daughter and the cat. His resistance faltered as he noticed how tightly Lily was clinging to the tiny creature, as if it were a lifeline. "Let's dry him off," he said finally, his voice softening. Wrapped in an old towel, the cat let out a small, contented purr. Lily smiled for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "I'll call him Oliver," she said, stroking his damp fur. Laura watched her daughter, something tightening in her chest. She hadn't seen Lily this animated in weeks. Maybe, just maybe, this stray cat wasn't just a temporary guest. Oliver quickly made his presence known in the Bennett household. He wasn't a shy cat. He had a way of inserting himself into everyone's space. He'd leap onto Laura's desk, batting at her pens as she worked late into the night. At first, she shooed him away, annoyed by the distraction. But gradually, she found herself smiling at his antics. One evening, she even set out a small cushion on her desk for him, a silent acknowledgement that his company was welcome. Mark, who had spent countless hours isolating himself in the garage, found Oliver trailing after him like a tiny shadow. The cat would watch intently as Mark worked, his head tilting curiously at the sound of clinking tools. One day, Mark chuckled as Oliver swatted at a wrench he'd dropped. It was the first time he'd laughed in months. But it was Lily who bonded with Oliver the most. She'd spend hours sketching him as he lounged in patches of sunlight or chased invisible prey across the living room. Her sketchbook, once a symbol of her grief, began to fill with life again. Oliver's presence was subtle but transformative. It was like a soft thread weaving its way through the frayed edges of their lives, pulling them closer together. One evening, as Oliver darted after a ball of yarn, Lily turned to her parents with a question that hung heavily in the air. "Do you think Ethan would have liked him?" The room went still. It was the first time Ethan's name had been spoken aloud in weeks, and it hung in the air like a fragile bubble, ready to burst. Laura set down her cup of tea, her hands trembling slightly. "He would have adored him," she said finally, her voice soft. "Ethan always had a gift for seeing beauty in things others overlooked." Mark smiled, a rare warmth spreading across his face. "He'd probably teach him tricks or build him some elaborate playground," he added, his tone lighter than it had been in months. The three of them laughed together, hesitant at first, but then with genuine mirth. It was a sound that felt foreign in the house, yet so desperately needed. For the first time since Ethan's passing, the Bennetts weren't just surviving. They were remembering him with joy, not just pain. Oliver became more than a stray. He became a symbol of the life they could rebuild. The Bennetts began sharing small moments together again. Meals, laughter, stories. And at the center of it all was a scruffy little cat who had shown up when they needed him most. But life, as it often does, had another challenge waiting for them. And Lily, sweet, creative Lily, shut down entirely. Her once vivid sketches of dragons and enchanted forests disappeared, replaced by blank pages that mirrored her grief. The house became a mausoleum of memories. Ethan's room was left untouched, his soccer cleats still by the door, his laughter an echo that refused to fade. It wasn't just the loss of Ethan that broke them, it was the way their grief isolated them from one another. They were three people under the same roof, each drowning in their own pain, unable to reach out for the lifeline they so desperately needed. And yet, as often happens in life, when it seemed the storm might never end, a faint whisper of hope found its way to them. It was a stormy November evening, and the rain outside was relentless. The kind of rain that pounds against windows and turns streets into rivers. Lily sat by the window, watching the droplets race down the glass. Her gaze was distant, her mind miles away, replaying fragments of memories she didn't want to lose. Then she heard it. A sound so soft she almost missed it. A meow. At first, she thought she was imagining things, but then it came again, louder this time. She blinked, her trance broken, and turned toward the door. Curiosity, and something else she couldn't quite name, pushed her to her feet. She opened the door to find a small, scruffy cat huddled on their porch. Its fur was soaked, its green eyes wide and pleading. For the first time in weeks, Lily felt a flicker of emotion she couldn't ignore. "Mom, Dad," she called, her voice carrying an urgency that had been absent since Ethan's death. "There's a cat out here." For weeks, Oliver was the light in the Bennetts' lives, an anchor pulling them back to shore. Each day with him brought small joys, a playful pounce, a curious nudge, or the simple comfort of his soft purring as he curled up on someone's lap. Slowly but surely, the house began to feel less like a tomb and more like a home again. But life, unpredictable as ever, threw the family a curveball one rainy morning. It began like any other day. The sky was overcast, and the sound of rain tapping against the windows filled the house. Laura was in the kitchen making coffee. Mark was reading the newspaper, and Lily was on the floor, dangling a feather toy for Oliver to chase. "Mom, look at him. He's so fast." Lily laughed, her voice bubbling with the kind of carefree joy that had been absent for far too long. But when Lily turned back to show her mom another of Oliver's antics, the cat was gone. At first, she thought he'd scampered off to another room. "Oliver?" she called, standing up and peeking around the corner. No response. The minutes stretched, and her calls grew louder. Panic started to creep into her voice. "Mom, Dad, he's not here." Laura and Mark joined the search, combing through every nook and cranny of the house. They checked closets, under beds, even behind the couch. But Oliver was nowhere to be found. "Maybe he slipped outside," Mark suggested, though his voice was tinged with worry. The three of them grabbed raincoats and umbrellas, stepping out into the storm. The rain was relentless, drenching them within minutes as they called out into the gray morning. "Oliver!" Lily's voice cracked as she searched, her tears blending with the rain. The hours stretched on, and their hope began to wane. By evening, the family returned home, exhausted and disheartened. Lily slumped onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. "Why does everything I love leave me?" she whispered, her voice thick with despair. Mark knelt beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. His heart ached for his daughter, for the pain she shouldn't have to bear at her age. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the things we love find their way back to us. We just have to believe." But belief felt like a fragile thread, stretched too thin against the weight of their loss. The next morning dawned cold and gray, the rain finally reduced to a soft drizzle. Lily sat by the window, her chin resting on her knees, staring out at the empty street. And then she heard it, a soft, familiar meow. Her heart leaped as she scrambled to her feet, throwing open the door. There, standing on the porch, was Oliver. He was muddy and tired, his fur matted from the rain, but his green eyes were as bright and alive as ever. "Oliver!" Lily cried, scooping him up and holding him close. Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were tears of relief and joy. Laura and Mark rushed to the door, their expressions shifting from worry to astonishment. "He's back," Laura whispered, a small smile tugging at her lips. Mark reached out to scratch behind Oliver's ears, his tough exterior softening. "Guess he wasn't ready to leave us after all," he said. The moment felt almost surreal, as if the Oliver's return brought a renewed sense of unity to the Bennetts. He wasn't just a cat, he was a symbol of resilience, of the possibility that even in the darkest times, something good can find its way back to you. Ivers had decided to throw them a lifeline just when they were about to lose hope. As the days passed, the Bennetts slowly began to find their rhythm again. They had Oliver, but more importantly, they had each other. The house that had once felt so heavy with grief was now filled with quiet moments of connection, small acts of kindness, and the soft, steady purring of a cat who had somehow brought them back to life. The Bennetts' healing wasn't immediate, nor was it perfect. The wounds of their loss were still there, raw and tender, but they had learned to live with them, to acknowledge the pain, but also to find a way to move forward. Together. Laura found herself cooking Ethan's favorite meals once more, the familiar smells filling the house with comfort. As she stirred a pot of spaghetti, she would sometimes catch herself smiling at the memory of Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, eagerly waiting for his plate. It was a bittersweet feeling, but it was also a sign that she was starting to remember the joy, not just the sorrow. Mark, too, began to open up again. The garage, once a place of isolation, became a space for shared moments. One evening, he set up a workbench in the garage and invited Lily to join him. He wasn't fixing anything in particular, but just being together side by side felt like progress. Oliver, of course, was never far behind, darting between the two of them, his presence a constant reminder that even in their quietest moments, they were not alone. Lily's sketchbook began to fill with new drawings, vibrant and full of life. She'd draw Oliver chasing butterflies, or sitting in the sun, his eyes full of mischief. Some pages were still dedicated to memories of Ethan, but now there was color in her drawings, a sense of hope that had been absent for so long. It wasn't just the family who felt the change, the neighbors noticed too. Mrs. Jenkins, who lived next door, stopped by one afternoon with a casserole. "I've seen a lot of smiles coming from your house lately," she remarked, her eyes twinkling. "I'm glad to see you all doing better." Laura nodded, a faint smile on her lips. "It's been a long road," she said, "but we're getting there." One quiet evening, as the family sat around the living room, Oliver curled up in Lily's lap, purring softly. A question floated into the air, unspoken but palpable. It was a question that had been on their minds for some time, but none of them had dared to voice it. Lily, stroking Oliver's fur, turned to her parents. "Do you think Ethan sent him to us?" Laura's heart tightened at the question, but this time, instead of the pain it once caused, it brought a sense of peace. She glanced at Mark, who met her gaze with a knowing look. "I think he did," Mark said quietly. "Maybe not in the way we expect, but somehow, I think Ethan knew we'd need someone like Oliver." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but they were different this time. They were tears of healing, tears of gratitude. "I think so too." As if on cue, Oliver let out a soft, contented meow, nuzzling against Lily's hand. It felt like a sign, a confirmation that love, in all its forms, never truly leaves. It changes, yes, it evolves, but it doesn't disappear. The Bennetts had learned that love is a thread, woven through time, stretching across the gaps that grief can create. It may fray, it may break, but with patience and care, it can be mended. And sometimes that mending comes in the most unexpected of forms. A stray cat with green eyes and a heart full of quiet love. As the seasons changed, so did the Bennetts. They weren't the same family they had been, but in some ways, they were stronger. They had learned to embrace the pain, to hold it close without letting it define them. They had learned that healing isn't linear, it doesn't happen all at once. But with love, whether it's from family, friends, or a little stray cat, you can start to find your way back to joy. One crisp evening in early spring, as the sun dipped low in the sky and the first flowers of the season began to bloom, Lily sat in the yard, sketching. Oliver lay beside her, lazily chasing the fluttering shadows of birds. Her pencil moved across the page, bringing to life a new story. A story of hope, of love, and of a family reunited. As she finished her drawing, she looked up, a smile breaking across her face. Her parents were sitting on the porch, talking softly, sharing the kind of quiet moments that had been so rare in the months following Ethan's death. And for the first time in a long time, Lily felt like she could breathe again. The Bennett's life had changed in ways they could hardly have imagined just a few months earlier. Where once there was only pain, there was now an unexpected peace, woven together by moments of quiet laughter, small victories, and the gentle presence of Oliver. In the mornings, Laura found herself humming as she made breakfast, the sound of her voice a soft echo of the woman she used to be before the tragedy. She had begun taking long walks again, sometimes with Mark, sometimes alone, her mind at ease for the first time in a long while. Oliver, always by her side, seemed to know when she needed him most. The simple act of petting him, feeling the soft warmth of his fur under her hands, was enough to calm the storm inside her. Mark had found new ways to honor Ethan. He had placed a framed photo of Ethan's graduation day beside his workbench, a reminder of the son he would always carry in his heart. And as he tinkered with small repairs around the house, he found solace in the idea that he was rebuilding not just their home, but their lives. Each small fix, each nail, each screw, felt like a gesture of love, a way of holding on to the parts of Ethan that were still with him. Lily, for her part, had begun to talk more about Ethan, sharing memories of him that had once been too painful to speak aloud. She would tell her parents about the way Ethan used to steal the last cookie from the jar, or how he'd help her with her homework, even when he was the one who needed help the most. She had also started to share her drawings with them, each page a tribute to the way Oliver had helped her heal. It was as if the act of creating had brought her closer to Ethan, like each line and curve was a way of saying goodbye without really letting go. One evening, as they sat together for dinner, the room was filled with the comforting hum of normalcy, the clinking of silverware, the soft laughter of shared stories. It was in that moment that Laura realized how much had shifted, how far they had come. The Bennetts were no longer just surviving. They were living again. But even in the midst of this newfound peace, there lingered a question that had been on the edge of their minds since Oliver had first appeared in their lives. Lily, who had always been the dreamer of the family, was the one who voiced it. She had been watching Oliver chase a butterfly in the yard, his tiny paws skimming the grass as if he were dancing. She paused for a moment, her thoughts turning inward, and then spoke up. Do you think Ethan sent him to us?" The question hung in the air, a fragile thread connecting their past to their present. It was a question they had all asked themselves at one point or another, but none of them had dared to speak it aloud until now. Laura glanced at Mark, her eyes searching for the right words. She had always believed in the power of love, the kind of love that transcends death, that lingers even after a person is gone. But this was different. This was a question that required more than belief. It required acceptance. "I think maybe he did," Laura said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Maybe Ethan knew we needed something to bring us back to life. And maybe, just maybe, Oliver was the way. Mark nodded, his hand resting on Laura's. He's been a reminder to us all that even in the darkest times, something beautiful can find its way into our lives. He's part of Ethan's gift to us. Lily smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. I like that idea. I like thinking that Ethan found a way to take care of us, even when he couldn't be here. The three of them sat in silence, their hearts full with the weight of their thoughts. It was as if the answer had always been there, quietly waiting for them to realize it. In the weeks that followed, the Bennett's life continued to flourish in unexpected ways. They had found a sense of peace, but more than that, they had found a deeper understanding of love. Laura and Mark began to talk more about their future. They made plans, not just to heal, but to truly live again. They talked about travel, about places they wanted to visit, about memories they wanted to create. For the first time since Ethan's death, they allowed themselves to dream. Lily, too, had big plans. She was considering a career in art, inspired by the drawings that had brought her back to herself. She had started looking at colleges and exploring her options, and for the first time in years, she felt excited about what was to come. And through it all, Oliver remained a constant. He wasn't just a pet. He was family. He had filled the space that had once been empty, and his quiet presence was a reminder that love never truly leaves us. It changes, yes, it evolves, but it never disappears. As they sat on the porch one summer evening watching the sun set behind the trees, the Bennetts reflected on how far they had come. They had lost so much, but they had also gained so much. And through it all, they had learned that healing was not a destination but a journey they would take together, no matter what the future held. In that quiet moment, as the sky turned from pink to purple, they realized that they were no longer just surviving. They were living. And that was enough. The Bennetts had come to understand that the road to healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about making room for both the joy and the pain side by side. It was about learning to live with the absence of Ethan while embracing the love and memories he left behind. Oliver had been their gentle guide on this journey, a quiet presence who had reminded them that life, though fragile and unpredictable, was also full of second chances. As the months went by, the family grew stronger in their bond, and the house that had once felt so hollow began to hum with the warmth of shared experiences. The walls, once echoing with silence, now resonated with the sounds of laughter, the shuffling of feet, and the familiar creaks of old furniture. The evenings spent together, watching movies, sharing stories, or simply sitting in silence, became treasured moments. And in every quiet pause, Oliver was there, curled up on a lap or stretched out in a sunbeam, as if he had always belonged. One Sunday afternoon, as the Bennetts sat on the porch with their feet propped up and their hearts full, Laura turned to Mark, her eyes reflecting the sunset's soft glow. "I think Ethan would have liked the way we're living now," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "He would have wanted us to be happy again." Mark nodded, his arm around her shoulders. "I think you're right," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "He wanted us to find our way, and maybe we finally have." Lily, who had been lost in thought as she sketched in her notebook, looked up at them, her eyes clear and bright. "Do you think Ethan knew? Do you think he knew how hard it would be, but that we'd make it through?" There was a long pause before Laura spoke, her voice soft and sure. "I think he knew we'd make it through because he knew we had each other, and we always will." Lily smiled, a quiet understanding settling in her heart. "And Oliver," she added, "I think he was sent to us to remind us of that love never really leaves us." Mark chuckled softly, his heart full. "I think you're right, kiddo." The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. The Bennetts learned to embrace the quiet moments, knowing that each one was a gift. The world around them continued to move. Time never stopped, but they had learned to move with it, not in spite of it. In the stillness of the evening, when the house was calm and the only sound was the soft ticking of the clock, they would sometimes pause just for a moment and look at each other. There were no words needed, just the understanding that they had made it through the storm together. And as they sat in the warmth of their home, surrounded by love, they knew one thing for certain. They had come back to life. As the Bennetts looked back on their journey, they realized that healing didn't have to be a solitary process. It was about reaching out to one another, finding strength in the most unexpected places, and allowing love to fill the gaps where the pain once was. It was about trusting that, no matter how hard life gets, we're never truly alone. So what about you? Have you ever experienced a moment where hope came from the most unexpected source? Maybe a pet, a person, or even an event that changed the way you see the world? Share your story with us in the comments below, and remember, love and healing are always within reach, even when we can't see them at first. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartwarming stories that remind us all to hold on to hope, no matter what life brings. Thank you for following the Bennett's journey. You've seen how they found healing in each other, and in the unlikeliest of places, a stray cat named Oliver. Their story is a reminder that even in our darkest moments, light can find its way to us. Stay strong, and may your heart always be open to the love that's waiting to find you.